checking the lighting. Does it seem okay? I was getting some hot spots, so I was just putting down shades, but I think it seem okay?
I actually can't see you. I can hear you.
Oh, that's good
There we go.
Lord.
There we go.
Uh, yeah.
Hey, Dashka, thanks for joining me. I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I This is the most excited I've been for a podcast in a long time. And I truly mean that because this book right here, the 57 Bus, is one of my favorite uh, nonfiction reads that I've read in a very long time. And I actually just read it a couple of months ago, and so I was like, wow, wonder how I can get in touch with Dashka here, and boom, here we are.
And here we are. So thank you for getting in touch.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So real quick, Dashka Slater is here. She is a New York Times bestselling author of the 57 Bus, an award-winning journalist who has written for the New York Times and Mother Jones. She's here promoting her two new books, which are now in 2021, which are called The Book of Fatal Errors and a book for Escargot. She is a writer of a lot of books, and mostly what I've seen were children's books. A good majority are children's books.
Yeah, that's true. I have 3 books for adults, and the rest are books for kids.
Uh, why children? Like I understand, like people have a soft place for children and stuff like that. But after reading the 57 Bus, it's shocking to me that you, and no disrespect, it's shocking that you write children's books because this one was just so eye opening.
Well, thank you. For me, writing for children is this incredible opportunity to talk to the most engaged readers on the planet. That when you are writing for children, you know that they are listening to every word, they're looking at every detail of the illustration. You're have this opportunity to kind of furnish their imaginations, like those they don't our brains are stuffed with stories and media and all this things, all the things that we've absorbed during our lifetimes. Children are more stuffed with media than they used to be, but they're still not as nearly as stuffed as we are. And so it's really this amazing opportunity for a writer to have somebody take in what you've done with their whole being and memorize it and ask you questions about obscure details. So
Mhm.
it's great fun.
And I'm going to take this podcast a different route. My main thing I want to talk about is your two books that you're promoting, and also the 57 Bus, obviously. But I want to talk about your background a little bit. How did you figure out in your life that, hey, I want to write for a living?
Well, I'd love to say that it was like this bolt of lightning, but it was actually in my family a fairly obvious choice. Both my parents are writers, and so it wasn't like, I was suddenly making this incredible departure into unknown territory. I started telling stories as soon as I could talk. I learned to read early, which back then was really considered some sign of genius. It's not.
Mhm.
But it did mean that I was engaged with books really early and writing things down quite early as well. And so it was kind of natural for my parents to say, oh, Dashka is probably going to be a writer. And for me to say, I think I want to be a writer. And then I actually, as I grew up and kept writing and, stayed really wanting to do that, I did try and find another job, another way to make a living, because I knew firsthand that it's not a very dependable source of income. Um, but unfortunately, I'm not really good at anything else. And so I ended up, being a writer just as I predicted when I was like 4 years old.
I wonder, because for a while I went to school, went to college for journalism because I'm like you. I just love to write. I think I'm a great storyteller, and so I've been told. But I wonder if your path was kind of the same as mine. Like, really, you shined out through reading and language arts, and then you realized, oh, okay, I understand what I'm doing here. I may not be good at all the other stuff, but this is one thing that I'm good at, and I know I can excel at.
Yeah, that's very true, particularly because, I liked math up until a certain point. But then, like after a certain point, it was like I was just
Yeah.
not getting it. So the STEM route, which I actually tried to take, was maybe a little less accessible to me. And so I
Yeah.
was one of those people who had like those incredible gulf in my SAT scores where it was like really, really high on language arts and really, really low on
Yeah.
math.
Yeah. And for you, when you were in school, like, because I've heard people say, I will read, but not when I'm told to read, or I want to read something that obviously, because I'm the same way. I like reading certain genres of books. Like I'm not a fiction person mostly. I'm a memoir, nonfiction, true story type of person. How were I was the same way all throughout school. What about you? Was it just whatever you could get your hands on?
Yeah, I was a very non-discriminating reader. Like
Mm,
I grew up in a household that was filled with printed material, like just everywhere on every surface, and I read everything. Like I would pick it up and I would read it. I would read through bookshelves. Um, and like we had an Encyclopedia Britannica that my mom had bought at a thrift shop
mm,
that was outdated even then, but I don't think I read it cover to cover, but I would be in there pulling, those off the shelf and then
yeah.
like reading, poetry and, magazines, just like whatever was in front of me, things that were totally inappropriate. I was reading.
Well,
And
yeah.
in the library, the same thing, reading alphabetically through the entire library was my goal.
Yeah, it's funny because, I look back now and I'm like, there's no way that I could see myself doing a podcast and being in the journalist side. But for me, do you ever find a point of when you're writing, whatever you're writing, whether it be a column for a New York Times or another book or whatever, that you just like, okay, this story is not hitting like I wanted it to. Let's start fresh. How many times has that happened in your career?
Oh, well, I mean, that's every manuscript in some way.
Okay.
Like, very rare that I get it right the first time. I'm very much a multiple draft person. And I tell my students all the time, like, you know, don't start tinkering at the edges too early. Uh, you know, set it aside, try writing it from scratch and see what's different, what happens when you put aside what you think you know about how to write a story and start fresh. So yeah, I think that's the process. That's what I love about writing versus real life is you get do-overs.
Well, and you were actually the first author that I've had on the podcast. And so I just have so many questions that I've always wondered my whole entire life, which is, let's take children's book, for example. Let's not take a true story like the 57 bus. Let's take the Book of Escargot. Do you know exactly what you want to tell through that story beginning to end? So you just
No.
started and you're like, okay, for example, I want to write a book about a caterpillar. He's caring. We're going to show kids how to care. Now we have to just work through the screenplay. We have to work through the storyboards, etc.
Yeah, I tend to start, well, there's a lot of different ways into stories, and all of my books are different. So sometimes it's a plot idea, sometimes it's a character, sometimes it's just an image. My book, The Antlered Ship, came like the image of a ship with antlers came in a dream. Uh, my book, Dangerously Ever After, was based on a story that my first grade son told me, that he thought it would be really funny if somebody planted rose seeds and they turned out to be nose seeds, which is what happens in Dangerously Ever After. So, you can beginning, middle, end, plot, character, image, they come to me in all different ways, but then it's trying to figure out like, okay, I know that a character has to do something, a character has to have a problem, a character has to have a goal. So if I'm starting with a character, what are those for that character? If I'm starting with a plot, like, well, who is in this situation and why is it important to them? I almost never start with a theme or a message. because I just find that tends to result in books that are preachy, and nobody wants to read that. So I tend to just like, what is something that's lighting my imagination on fire, and seems like it would be a place where I could live for a while, because obviously any book, if you're writing multiple drafts, you're going to be there for a while. So it better be something that's going to stay interesting.
Are you ever reading someone else's book and you're like, okay, I see what they did there, but I could have made it better in my opinion? Like, because I know I do that a lot, and I know I'm not a writer, but like I will read, like, for example, I just finished Lenny Kravitz's book and I thought it was fantastic, but it was like, okay, I could have took this story here and I either could have put it in the beginning or chopped it out because it just didn't make sense to the whole theme of the book.
Yeah, of course. There are times when I see a writer's choice and I think, yeah, I would have done that differently. I think one of the more interesting questions you can ask yourself as a writer who's reading is why? Why did the author make that choice? Even if you
Mhm.
think as a reader, I wish it had gone differently, or as a writer, I would have made a different choice. Like,
Mhm.
what was the writer's agenda? What was their uh, reasoning behind or motivation behind making certain choices?
Okay, so you said you were always writing. Your parents were writers, so books and words were everywhere. It didn't matter what it was you were reading it. When you get out of high school, what happens next?
Okay, so I get out of high school. I was a poet in high school, and I like that was my whole thing. I was also a dancer, but uh, let's leave that aside for a moment. And I go to college, and I did not love the English department. Like, I assumed I would be an English major,
Mhm.
and I had an encounter very early on in a poetry workshop where I was like, I don't like this world. Like, I don't. These people are not my people. Uh, I wasn't feeling it. So I was like, I need to do something else.
Mhm.
And so I went on this totally different trajectory where I didn't write for about a year. And I was like, I had various plans. One point, I was going to be a midwife. I dropped out of school and went to midwifery school. And at another point, I was like, I'm going to be like an environmental policy person, and which is kind of what I ended up studying in college.
Okay, let's take that.
And
Let's take that 1 year where you didn't write. Let's take that 1 year where you didn't write. Did you miss that at all?
oh, I missed it a ton.
Okay,
I
well,
missed
see,
it a ton.
see, then that should have given you the idea that I miss it so much. That's what I have to do.
Yeah, well, that's basically what happened, was that then I went back, and I did actually end up taking a lot of poetry workshops in
Okay.
college and having that be a big part of my life as well, but not my major. Um, and then when I got out of college, I still was trying to pursue something that would have a more steady paycheck, because poetry, I was pretty sure, was not going to be like a big cash cow for me.
Mhm.
And so I I tried some different things, and then I was trying to write a novel, and so I was working temp and writing at the same time. And that was around the period of time when I just kind of fell into journalism completely unplanned.
Is it harder to write a nonfiction book like the 57 Bus besides like The Wishing Box or the Book of Fatal Errors, which, are fiction?
You know, I have to say, since I moved back and forth between the two,
Yeah.
writing fiction, I'm always like, I wish I was writing nonfiction where
Okay.
everything's already decided. Like, I'm working within a universe that has been predetermined, and I'm just trying to figure out the best way to tell a story that exists. When I'm writing nonfiction, I'm like, I wish I was writing fiction where I could just make stuff up and I could make it go the way that I think, would work really well for plotting. So there's advantages to both. There's things that are
Mhm.
easier about each one, or seem like they would be easier when I'm doing the other one. But they're both, writing's just hard. There's no way around it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But at least in a fiction, you can make the ending how you want it to happen and give you either, because I was reading something about Stephen King and he was talking about one of his books, I'm not sure which one, where he was just in a foul mood. And so the ending was just very, very terrible because it was just that kind of mood he was in. But like it or Carrie, he knew exactly how he wanted it to end. And it was like, it doesn't matter because you're not going to look upon it and be like, that was a terrible ending because it's Stephen King, but it's how he wanted to end it versus if he was to write about the Black Plague that happened back in the 19th century, then he could do it. And I don't think people realize that about how tough it is. I compare it to making a movie about like a biopic because you can twist and turn the story whatever you want, but you have to get that one message through. I don't know if that makes
Yeah.
any sense. I know I rambled there, but
Well, I think endings are really, really hard. And, that is just to create that feeling of satisfaction in the reader where they're like, yes, this was the place to end it. I feel like that was a satisfactory reading experience and you didn't, wrap things up too neatly, but you didn't leave me hanging. Like all of that is very, very challenging. And when you're working with real life that doesn't tie itself up into a bow in a nice way like fiction does, that's a particular challenge.
all right. So now in your life, you are back in college. You studied poetry. Now you're writing what you've wanted to do your whole life. What is your next step? Is your next step to, make writing a hobby and just get a regular paying job? Or is your next objective is, okay, I have to get a job where I have to write constantly?
Well, my idea at first was that I would have a day job to support my writing habit. Like I knew that I would write and that I wanted to publish, but I just didn't think it was going to pay enough for it to be the only thing that I did. And I knew that a lot of people sort of become academics and they write and they teach. And I did not want to be in the ivory tower. That
Mhm.
was my both my parents were college professors. My dad was very frustrated with academia and eventually left it. And so and I was feeling the same way in college by the end, like I want to be in the world. So I knew that I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to, get advanced degrees and go work in the university. So then I just figured, well, I'll have some kind of job and hopefully it won't take up too much of my time so that I can still write and then I'll write and hopefully publish and you know but I'll still be able to eat something that isn't ramen noodles. So that was my goal. And I did that for a while, working just as a temporary secretary. And then I eventually moved into marketing, and I did marketing for software company and a publishing company, and and I was thinking, okay, I kind of have this balance going, but it's pretty hard to after working an 8-hour day to have the energy for doing a lot of writing. But I was trying to juggle, and then I had this, I was this fangirl really for a local paper called the East Bay Express that was a free weekly alternative paper and just had the most incredible writing in it. And I was a total fangirl for all of these bylines. I knew them all. They could write about anything and it was always interesting. And I was like, I want to do that. Like, I don't know what that is because I knew I didn't want to be a journalist because journalism was boring, but I did want to do whatever kind of writing those people were doing. And so I ended up taking a class, a night school class that was offered by the editor of that paper. And he liked the piece that I wrote for his class and he ended up putting it on the cover of the paper. And then all of a sudden I was like moving into this journalism space and discovered that it actually was journalism and it wasn't boring. And you could be a creative writer and value good wordsmithing and interesting story structure and still write nonfiction. And so that's what I ended up doing.
And I find it weird because a lot of, for example, like John Grogan, the guy that wrote like Marley and Me. He was writing for a newspaper and magazines, and he was like, I hated being told what to write about. So I just took a step and wrote about what I wanted to write about. And it turns out that was one of his biggest and probably the biggest bestseller he's had. And I think that's kind of the same with you. Like, nobody likes being told what to do, especially when you're writing and you love to write and they're like, hey, there was a thunderstorm and it knocked down a tree. We need you to go over there and write about it in the paper. But then when you get, the story of the two teenagers and the guy sitting um, on fire, and you just turn it into a book, becomes your bestseller. That's amazing to me because, and I wonder, and we're going to get to that later. I wonder what's the mindset behind that, like behind, being told to go write for this, and then you expanding that and the book becoming as big as it is.
Well, I should start by saying that you have said it exactly right. I've never been good at being told what to do. And so I've been lucky enough in my life as a professional writer and as a journalist that I had a lot of freedom. 10 years as a staff writer, I was never told to go write about a falling down tree, luckily.
Okay.
Like I always was directing. Just it was the kind of paper that I worked for. It's not true
Okay.
for most people, but I happened to work for a paper where I could say, I want to write about this. I think this is interesting. And I had an editor who, generally said yes. And, sometimes said, I think that's a terrible idea. But generally, I had a lot of freedom to do that. And so when I stopped being a staff writer and became a freelancer, that was always my goal. Just I'm going to write about what's interesting to me. Why do this otherwise? So the story of the 57 bus was a story that I pitched
Okay.
to the New York Times Magazine. So it wasn't assigned to me. It was something that happened just right in my neighborhood, actually, that I felt like had the potential to be very revealing of a lot of topics that I've spent my career thinking about. So I pitched it to the New York Times Magazine. They said yes, and I started reporting it for them. And when when the piece was done and after it ran, I took it to my agent and was able to say, like, I think there's more here. What do you think about turning this into a book?
You now are got your story published on the front page of a newspaper. What is going on in your mind at this point? Because give or take, it's just a paper, but then also you have to be like, whoa, I'm on a paper.
Yeah. And this was before the internet. I'm dating myself a little bit here, but it was before the internet. So, the Free Weekly was the source of information in the community. Everybody read the Express, even if it was just to like find out what movies were playing. Like you had to pick it up to find out like what bands were playing, what movies were playing, read the restaurant reviews, find out the local news. Like everything was there. And so I had this intoxicating experience of being able to like walk into a cafe anywhere in town and people are reading my article because the Express came out on Thursdays, Wednesday evenings actually. And, so everybody picked it up when it came out to get their kind of make their weekend plans, et cetera. And so I had that feeling of like, wow, this doesn't happen with poetry. Like you don't walk into any bar, any restaurant, any cafe, see people at the bus stop reading your stuff. And I was like, I like this feeling. I like feeling like what I write is being read, which turns out to be like this key part of the equation is the relationship between writer and reader. Like it doesn't exist until somebody's read it.
But I also,
So
but also with that feeling of, yes, they're reading my stuff, has to come the stress and anxiety of, oh my God, they're reading it. What are they thinking? Did they think, who is this chick? Are they thinking, oh, this is fantastic. This could have been done better.
yeah, of course. And so I would just sit there, but I could watch them read it. I could see their facial expressions.
Yeah.
Like it was, now we get that sort of too much of that because we get like people are tweeting their takes on your headlines. Like they haven't even read the article, but they just like have an opinion about the headline, which of course we don't write, the headline writer writes that. So, there's a little too much feedback at this point. But back then there really wasn't. And so it felt exposing and like, I hope I didn't screw this up, but it didn't feel like, I think it's much more uh, anxiety producing now, where that like everybody who wants to respond is going to respond, and they're going to respond they're not going to write a letter to the editor, they're going to like put it on social media. So that is a little bit more intense, I would say, than seeing somebody read it in a cafe.
Yeah, but you're always going to get that no matter what you do. Like it could be on the President Joe Biden's reading list of the summer, and people are still going to be like, this is terrible. Who cares? But it doesn't but it doesn't matter as long as it stays true to you, what you wanted to write about, how your fans are processing it, and how, the media is taking it. I think that's really what matters. But you're always going to have, because I say this all the time, you're going to have 10,000 positive views, positive reviews, positive outlooks, but you're going to have one negative, and you're going to look at that negative and you're going to be like, you know what? I'm going to make that negative guy love me so much. And then it just tears you down and murders you,
Well, I think that it's one of the things that happens when you write, publicly, when you write journalism in particular, is you do develop a really thick skin. You learn just that you absolutely are not going to make that guy love you. It's what I have learned, that and there's no point in trying. My job is to do the best work, to be the most accurate, to be the most compassionate, to be ethical in how I conduct myself. And some people are going to like it and some people aren't. And there's literally nothing I can do to change the people who didn't. So, you develop some perspective, which I think is good to, it allows you to keep going, because if you're going to be, knocked down by every negative thing, most things are negative, actually. There's more people are motivated to respond to something they didn't like than that they did like. I am extremely grateful to every person who goes out of their way to contact me about something that they loved. Because that is, it tends to be a little less motivating, really. Not everybody's like you, who reads something, it's like, I'm going to contact that writer. So
I have some nerve, huh?
yeah, the good kind.
Now, I don't know what this is, and I want you to explain it to me. It said that you've written for Mother Jones. What is that?
Yeah.
A big company? I don't know what that is, and I'm sorry, I don't know what Mother Jones is. I want you to explain it. What is Mother Jones exactly?
Yeah, Mother Jones is an investigative magazine. They're a national magazine they have kind of an interesting model in that they are published by a foundation, a journalism foundation. And so they are able to support writers doing in-depth investigative work.
Got you.
And so I've written for them for a long time. I've written for other people besides the New York Times Magazine and Mother Jones as well. But Mother Jones is, maybe in some ways is like a writer's magazine, in that other journalists tend to know it because the quality of their journalism is so high and they tend to break big stories. They have a very good online presence as well.
It's very interesting, and to me, it sounds like they would publish stuff a normal magazine wouldn't or couldn't publish.
In some ways, yeah. I think that they're really good at going deep into a topic to really find out what is going. I mean, investigative work is hard and it's expensive, and I'll just put in a little plug for your listeners to subscribe to their local papers and to pay for their journalism, because the work of actually finding stuff out is extremely tedious and requires journalists to be paid, and newspapers and magazines to have the money to bankroll often a team of reporters going through government documents, by the carton, and tracking people down, and all of this legwork that just is very, very expensive. to do, because, assuming that you want your reporters to be able to, have roofs over their heads and food on their plate. You have to pay people to do, 8 months of investigating to be able to publish one story. And so, there's fewer and fewer outlets that can do that.
Rewind back for me. When was it when you first started making a living being able to write? Where you were like, okay, I know I'm stable enough now that I can write, I don't however many columns a week or a month, whatever it may be, that I can feed myself other than ramen.
I quit my day job in 1991,
Okay.
and yeah, and I've been doing it ever since. I should say that I'm very good at living on very little.
Oh yeah.
So, it's harder and harder. Just life has gotten, excuse me, so expensive that I think it's just the cost of housing in particular has
Yeah.
made it difficult to cobble together a living in the way that I have been fortunate really to be able to do
Yeah.
over many, many years.
It's shocking to me because you said you're able to live on very little. And me, I grew up in somewhat of a lower middle class. So we were kind of living check to check, most of my life. And I can now look back and be thankful, but I remember that little bratty kid, that couldn't get a toy at the store, but you wound up getting it and you realized that, your parents were stretching $200 for a week and a half and you're like, they still have to
Yeah.
pay the lights, they still have to buy groceries, and I look at that and I wonder, because I can do the same. I sit there and I'm like, you know what? It's easier to say you can go to struggling because you've done that your whole life. I can just give up right now and struggle, and you know what? I'm going to be perfectly happy because that's just you're used to that. That's your cherry in your pie. But and I wonder, what was it like for you to go, okay, doesn't matter what I'm going to do, I'm going to be a successful author and writer, to the point that made you go out and do it?
Well, for me, it is connected to the fact that I grew up without a lot of money. And so, like, that was my default. Like, I never thought, oh, I want to have a big house or, I want to be able to eat a fancy, like, of course, I would love all of those things. But that wasn't the goal. My goal was like, I don't want to have to work two jobs, like, I want to be able to just write. And if I can do that, then that's success. Now, of course, the bar is always moving. So once, I figured out like I can, make some kind of living, then it's like, well, I'd like to be a little bit more successful than that. I'd like to, write for bigger outlets, publish more kinds of things. You're always moving on. But uh, I do think you're absolutely right that knowing that it doesn't cost very much, you know how to make a living out of not very much is an incredibly wonderful skill to have. And I often say to people like who are talking about, when they're earlier in their careers and they're like, I'm thinking of taking this job just for a while, like a corporate job, a high paying job, just for a while. I'm going to make some money and then I can do what I want. Like, it's
Mm,
very hard to walk away from that paycheck once you've had it, then because,
yeah.
everybody moves up, their spending and their lifestyle and what they think they need moves up to whatever their income is. And so once you've had a taste of that money, I think it's really hard to, leave it all behind and figure out how to, how many different things you can do with ramen noodles, which is a lot, but
A
still.
lot. I learned quickly that you can drain the water out of it and then add like Worcestershire sauce and soy sauce and a bunch of other seasoning and make it taste, well, like a fancier crappy ramen, but it's still gonna taste like ramen.
Yeah, exactly. But the key is definitely you got to put extra stuff in it. Egg, I think, is really good, and
Okay.
cut up some vegetables.
um, as we kind of wind down here, and we're going on about an hour, talk about your two books that you're here to promote, are they out now or are they gonna come out soon?
Yeah, so they are out now,
Okay.
and they actually came out last year in the year
Okay.
very difficult to promote books in. So, and pardon my post-its, because when I do read alouds, and which I just did, it was World Read Aloud Day, so I was reading from this quite a bit to schools. So this is the Book of Fatal Errors. It's a first book in a middle grade series. It's about two cousins, Rufus Takata Collins and his cousin Abigail Vasquez. They're both just finished sixth grade, and they are not friends. Abigail's just moved into town. She's the one in the family who wins every prize, is very accomplished. Rufus is a little bit more of a kickback guy. He doesn't actually like to extend himself too much. And what he really likes to do is go to his grandfather's place, which is sort of mysterious in that nobody else in the outside of the family can find it.
Mhm.
And it's a big rambling property. And Rufus and Abigail discover that it is populated by these tiny winged beings called failings, who are desperately trying to get back to their own world and need the assistance of these two cousins. And it's a book that is about making mistakes. Rufus has had a very bad sixth grade year in which he has committed 3 fatal errors that have sort of doomed him socially in his middle school. And he keeps on making them as he's trying to figure out how to save these small creatures from extinction.
Now, is that because it looked like a thick book, so it's like a young reader's novel?
Yeah, yeah. So middle grade, sorry, I've thrown
Okay.
around jargon. Middle
That's
grade
okay.
is about ages 9 to 12. So it's kind of, you're reading independently. It's, the early Harry Potter books are middle grade. And yeah, so all my favorite books from being a child were middle grade books.
And what's different about this versus all the other stuff you've written? Did you go down a different path to write this? And I know this is a terrible question, but
No, I think it's a good question, actually. So it's my first fantasy. It's my first children's novel. So there were a lot of things
okay.
that were different about it, a lot of things I had to learn how to do. World building is one of them, where it's like, there's a whole system of magic. You have to figure out how it works. It has to be logical. You can't just, every time you need something, it has to be difficult. All of those, there's, several different kinds of mythical creatures. You have to figure out, like, how do they live? What do they do? Who can see them? Who can't? So all of that is challenging, super fun. But then you get editors asking you questions about the logic, and you're like, oh, I never thought of, like,
Mm.
why did this thing disappear but then didn't reappear? And you're like, I guess I got to figure out a reason for that. So that part is really fun.
If you wouldn't mind, about the Book of Escargot,
Yeah.
exactly, because that is kind of a short read children's story, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a picture book, illustrated. And it's the second book in the series about Escargot, who is a very beautiful French snail who, in the first book, wants to be your favorite animal. Escargot always is addressing the reader and asking the reader for different things. In the second book, he's at the library. He's looking for a book that stars a daring French snail hero, because all the books in the library that are about snails are either like making jokes about how slow snails are or about how shy snails are. Escargot is not into this snail stereotyping at all. And so he asks for the reader's assistance in writing a book that
Oh,
portrays snails in a better light.
that's very interesting. I like the turn, kind of the turn of events there, because you don't see that very much. It's kind of uh like a I don't know what it, like a read as you go type where you pick your destination. Like, if you choose this,
Yeah,
go to
yeah.
page 12 or page 45.
Exactly. Choose your own adventures. It's
Choose your
not
own
quite
adventure.
that
That's it.
not quite that elaborate, but it is the book is being written as the story goes on.
Now, if you wouldn't mind, can you tell the story behind the 57 bus? I know you get asked this a lot, but why not?
That's fine. I'm always happy to talk about it. The book of my heart. So the 57 bus is about two teenagers on either side of a high profile crime that took place in Oakland, California, where I live in 2013. It involves two teenagers, Sasha, who at the time of the book was 18, is agender, not male, not female, uses they, them pronouns. And Sasha was coming home from school on the 57 bus, attended a small private school, and was dressed in their usual outfit, which is a t-shirt and a fleece jacket and a newsboy cap and a gauzy white skirt. Fell asleep on the bus. There was another kid on the bus, 16-year-old Richard, who attended a large public high school, African-American boy who was with a cousin and a cousin's friend, and lit Sasha's skirt on fire with a lighter. The skirt erupted into a big ball of flames. Sasha was very badly burned, taken by ambulance to a San Francisco burn center. Richard was arrested at school the following day and charged with 2 serious felonies, each with hate crime enhancements, and faced the possibility of life in prison. So the book follows both of these young people up until the moment when their paths crossed on the bus, explains what happened on the bus, and then what happened afterwards with each of them.
So, kind of without giving anything away, which obviously you can look it up, but what kind of happens after this happens? After she is set on fire, or they are set on fire, etc.
Yeah, so Richard is in a very serious position because he's being charged as an adult despite being a juvenile. California at that time, like many states, has a law in the books, or had a law in the books. It's since been changed in California, but most states still have this kind of law that allows a district attorney to charge a young person as an adult, or sometimes compels a district attorney to charge a young person as an adult for certain crimes. And that means going to an adult prison.
Mhm.
Again, the time isn't capped out. So as a juvenile, you're going to be released before 21. If you're charged as an adult, you could be kept for life. And so Richard was in this very difficult situation. So at the same time, Sasha is recovering from these terrible burns. And so what happens, without giving too much away, is this question of what's going to happen to Richard, what's going to happen to Sasha, and how are they going to interact with a justice system that turns out is very much a blunt instrument for dealing with any crime, and is often extremely unsatisfying, both for the victim as well as for the person who is accused of the crime or has committed a crime. So Sasha's family grew increasingly frustrated with the justice system as well.
So you started writing this in a little notebook as a magazine article writer, and you say, okay, there's enough here to maybe write a book. So when you're doing all the research for the book, etc., are you going to the court cases? Are you going to what are you doing to get all this information? Are you just talking to, having hearsay people say they saw this, or what? How's that happening?
So there's kind of 3 broad categories of material that I'm gathering.
Okay.
Let's see if it actually is 3. It might be 4. Okay, so one is firsthand reporting. So I started reporting this about 3 or 4 days after Richard's arrest. So first thing I did was show up at one of his early court hearings. And from then on, I'm following things as they're happening. I'm at the hearings, but I'm also like at Sasha's house when Sasha's life was saved by somebody on the bus. And so after Sasha got out of the hospital, when that man, whose name is Dan Gale, was invited over to their house for brunch to see Sasha again for the first time since the fire, I was there for that. So,
Now,
you know,
how did you were you invited, or how? Because I'm very curious, because I want to know how this actually worked. How were you there for that? Did they reach out and say they knew you were
they
doing a
did.
paper? Okay, okay, okay,
So I had contacted both families, and I knew from the
okay.
beginning that I wanted to tell the story from both perspectives. And so I had contacted them, and I, you know, generally when I'm contacting people that I want to write about, I try to be really, really transparent about what I do and how I work, and, you know, invite them to go and read other things I've written and so forth, and then decide, because it's a big commitment. I'm not somebody who comes in and just, like, you know, does a half an hour interview and then bye-bye, you never see me again. I'm going to be like in your life. So but they happily were willing to do that. And so, yeah, so they were like, hey, we're having him over. Do you want to be there? It's like, yes, yes, I do. So, so I'm watching things firsthand. I'm also doing interviews with as many people as I can find that are reconstructing events of the past. You know, so how did Sasha figure out that they were agender? You know, I'm interviewing Sasha about that. I'm interviewing their parents about, you know, what that experience and so on. And at the same time, I'm trying to learn about Richard. So I'm interviewing Richard's teachers and this attendance officer at school that he was close to, and his former boss, and, you know, all of those things. So reconstructive interviews. And then I'm also looking at official documents of various kinds, you know, police reports, and, you know, there was a videotape of the police interview, and also of the incident itself. So I'm looking at those kinds of official sources of different kinds. And then I'm also, I knew there were four, I'm also interviewing experts of different people who can talk about gender identity, about juvenile justice, and, you know, hate crimes, and, you know, what kinds of people commit hate crimes, and what does the law say, and why does the law say that, and those kinds of things. So people who can give context to the events that I'm writing about.
When you're sitting in the court, and I don't know if you were there, and if so, this question is not relevant, but when the judge puts the hammer down and is like, okay, here's the ruling, what were your thoughts if you were there?
Well, as you know, if you read the book, what happened in Richard's case was very much a surprise to
Right,
everybody.
right, right, right.
And so it was, you know, it's like one of those things that as a reporter, it's like, oh, this is amazing. You know, this is because everybody's reactions were very large. You know, it was a very stunning thing that happened. I'm sorry not to be more, try not to give away.
No, 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 no,
uh,
no. I'm acting like I'm acting like I don't know, when obviously I do know, just
yeah,
for the
exactly.
entertainment.
So, you know, that's happening. But at the same time, I also, like, I've been reporting this story, you know, at that point for 14 months. And so, you know, I'm also having all of my emotions about, well, what has happened. And, you know, so, you know, there's kind of two things that are happening at the same time. You know, one is that I'm processing something very unexpected and upsetting. And at the same time, I'm like, okay, who do I need to talk to? What's everybody doing? Like writing furiously as I'm looking at everybody's faces, and thinking, okay, like I got to get the district attorney on the phone and figure out what just happened, and, you know, those kinds of things.
When you're doing the story and something big like what happened in Richard's case happened, you have to be, at least, you sure, you're shocked, you're hurt, but you have to be like, okay, this is going to be great entertainment in a bad way, but also a good way as well.
You know, I never think about what I do as entertainment. I
Okay.
think about what I do as storytelling, which, you know, I realize that maybe, you know, that sounds like I'm mincing words, but uh, I feel like there's an integrity to trying to tell a story that is about trying to deliver truth plus empathy, uh, and the empathy piece is missing from, and often the truth is missing from entertainment. So, that I want the story to be readable because I want people to read it. But I also want it to be worth reading and also worthy of the people who were generous in sharing their lives. So, so what I'm thinking about is generally not like, oh, this is going to be entertaining, as I think, oh, this helps tell this story that I want to tell, and that I want people to read.
Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit. All this is over, the book is written. When it's released, is it automatically a bestseller or is it kind of struggling on the charts?
Yeah, so it's not automatically a bestseller,
Okay.
and but it does get a lot of buzz right away, which was completely unexpected. I mean, this was very much a labor of love from the beginning, and I also, like, parenthetically, could never talk about it because it was, in the midst of criminal proceedings. The two sides, like, no information could pass between me. Like, I knew what was happening with each side, and I couldn't share that information with the other side. So, all of it, I had to keep my lips zipped the whole time I was working on it. And so it felt like very private in a lot of ways. Like, it was just this thing that I was thinking about all the time, but nobody else knew about.
Mm.
So, and that was true, a little bit less true after the newspaper piece came out, but it was still somewhat true in that, uh, newspaper pieces live for a short amount of time and then people move on. Uh, so when the book came out, I was stunned that it was getting all this attention, reviews, and it was a buzz pick, which is kind of a book industry thing where they say, like, we think this book is going to do well. And, all of a sudden there was a lot of interest in something that I kind of thought was like more of a niche topic. But it did not become a bestseller until quite a good amount of time had passed. I can't remember now how long it was, but the book came out in 2017 and became a bestseller last summer. So almost 2 years.
Is that
And
uncommon or is that common for because it's probably uncommon for a celebrity or whoever that has a book coming out that's well known. But is it uncommon or is it common for a book like the 57 Club that is about a hate crime?
yeah, it is uncommon. And I
Okay.
think in just about every situation that books, they have their season, and generally you feel like if a book doesn't make a splash in the season that it comes out, that was kind of the life of the book. And so the book was selling well, like it was a steadily, selling book. So I didn't feel like it had died on the vine, but I did think that, like, the opportunity for it to be a bestseller was well past. But it was a book that spread through word of mouth. And
Mhm.
so the more people read it, the more people were talking about it. Teachers were starting to use it in the classroom and to use it as curriculum, to buy it for their students to read, for independent reading. There was kind of just this slow snowball effect, very much assisted by the amazing marketing department at my publisher as well. So it's not like it happened completely on its own. There were people also helping it, but there was this kind of thing that happened very organically, where I think people were looking for ways to talk to their students, in particular. Young people were looking for ways to have conversations about gender and gender identity and race and justice and these kind of big topics. And my book provided this way to talk about those things in a pretty accessible way.
Where did it end up on the best-selling charts? Do you remember?
I should remember, but I don't. I
Anyways,
guess that shows, like, that's not false modesty. It's just really like, I never ever thought that this book
Yeah.
or any book was going to be a bestseller. It wasn't something that I was aiming for. And so like the fact that it was there, I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you something, and if you don't feel comfortable answering any questions I ask, you don't have to answer anything. I have a friend that is a published author, and when he wrote a book, he was paid a certain sum, and was like, whatever books he sells, whatever, that's just money for the publishing company. But is your thing kind of different, where like you're getting paid by how many books you sell?
Yeah. Oh, I'm happy to,
Okay,
without going into too much detail, to
yeah,
tell you
yeah, yeah,
kind of how it works.
yeah, sure,
So, so authors generally get an advance, what's called an advance on royalties, which is you get paid some money up front, and
right.
that's money that helps pay the bills while you're writing the book, basically. And then after the book comes out and people start hopefully buying it, uh, the author gets a remarkably small percentage of each book's sales. And that goes into an account that is basically paying back what they've already paid you. So most of the time, for many, many books, you may never see anything beyond what you got at the beginning. But hopefully, the book does what's called earning out, which means that all the money that was, the percentage that goes to you was enough to over time to pay back the publisher for
Okay,
the money they advanced you.
I got you.
And then you start collecting royalties again, and then you start hopefully getting
Okay,
checks in the mail.
let me see if I got this correct, and if I'm not, correct me. Let's just
Yeah,
say the book company's like, okay, we're going to give you 25,000, right? Let's just use that as a number, 25,000. Okay, they give you that, you make so much percentage on a book. When that 25,000 is accuperated to the publishing company, whatever comes after, you get a small percentage of.
exactly.
Is that kind of how it is?
Exactly.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So the royalty payment, is always the same, is always a percentage of sales. And then, but just the first you have to pay back what they've advanced you. And then before you start collecting that percentage in regular checks.
Got you. Two last questions for you.
Yeah.
One is, when you're doing these interviews, what is one question you're always going to get, no matter the type of interview you're going to be asked?
Well, everyone always wants to know about what Richard and Sasha are doing now. And I always have to tell them that I don't share that information because they were so generous in letting their story be told, for the book, but
Mhm.
that's kind of the end of their time in the public eye. And so, I don't share information about what they're doing now so they can go on and live their lives. Um, so I just saved you the trouble of asking that question, but almost always that's a question that I get.
What's one question or one topic that you're like, man, I'm just dying to talk about this, but no one ever asks me?
Oh, well, I love to talk about justice and about, uh, why write about justice, why talk about justice. Because, it's definitely the topic of the 57 bus, and it's in a lot of other things I write as well, because I've spent my career writing about the justice system. And so I'm always like, let's talk about like this word that we throw around all the time. And then it turns out it's extremely difficult to define.
Oh, yeah, and I think there's more of a meaning behind justice, behind, you got a bully and you're like, I'm going to get justice and I'm going to get some, I think that's totally misinterpreted in a lot of situations.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, uh, we often feel like we know it when we see it, like that feels like justice, but it's because of the system that we have all been raised in, we tend
Mhm.
to think of justice is that somebody else feels pain, like you were injured and
Yeah.
so you felt pain and then somebody else should feel pain and then that will be justice. So my question is why is that justice? Why, why does an extra person feeling pain now make us feel like we've gotten a result that has solved something.
You know, I use the book Just Mercy from Brian Stevenson. I use that a lot as not justice, because he puts in the book that, it's not about justice, it's about mercy. It's just like, give
Mhm.
us a little mercy. And I'm like, why can't we replace justice with mercy? It's just,
Oh, yeah,
you
yeah.
know, does that make any sense what I'm saying? I mean, I
It
know.
makes a ton of sense because, victims need mercy as well. And I think that one of the things that I hear a lot when I talk about trying to change what we do with the people who have committed crimes is, what about the victims? And there is no point at which we should lose sight of crime victims and their experiences and their needs. Uh, but the system we have does not serve crime victims very well. And I think most people who have been the victims of a crime do not walk out thinking, well, that went really, like, I was so well served by the system. There's
Yeah.
lots. And so, when we think about how could we do it differently, it's mercy for the people who have received trauma and pain from crime, um, as much as it is mercy for people who have committed crimes, for society as a whole. Like, everybody needs something more than they're getting.
I wish they would make a documentary or some type of book. And if they have, I haven't seen it, is like, let's say John goes over and for some reason murders Beth. And I don't, I want to hear Beth's story and a family, but I also want to hear how John's people are suffering as well. Because someone that his parents raised and he was a good kid, but he just got into the wrong crowd, did a mistake, a giant mistake. And it's probably unforgivable in Beth's eyes, but in everybody else's eyes, it's like, look, he did something. Yes, he killed somebody, but does he need to be? Does justice really need to be served because of one incident? I mean, you know what I mean?
I do. I think, that a piece of justice, as I think about it, is absolutely accountability. Like,
Mhm.
we can't, uh, we don't fix mistakes by pretending they didn't happen. So whatever the circumstances were by which somebody has hurt another person, intentional or unintentional, it happened. And so you can't look away from that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, in the 57 bus, that was something that I struggled with a lot as I got very wrapped up in Richard's story. It was like, no matter what else was happening with Richard, Sasha was set on fire while asleep on a bus and singled out,
Yeah.
because of gendered identity. And so that's part of the story. Um, so I think accountability is really a huge piece of it, and it's very
Mhm.
important for victims, I think, to have somebody say, like, I did that. Um, we run into other problems when they didn't do that, and we have people who are accused who are actually innocent. And a lot of the system that we have that's so unsatisfying exists to protect those people, to people who are accused of a crime that they didn't commit. So, it's tricky to figure out what a system is that's going to actually be fair to everybody. But accountability, I think, is a really big piece of the puzzle. And at the same time, when we incarcerate people, we are also punishing their family,
Right.
which is something that we would say, like, the idea that, like, uh, you did a crime, so your whole family is going to go to prison. We'd be like, no, that's crazy. That's wrong. Why would you can't punish somebody's family because of something they did. But in fact, that's exactly what we do, because as soon as you remove somebody from their family, they're not there to take care of their parents when they're, as they grow old. They're not there to raise their children. They're not there to provide income to, their family and their spouse. So, in effect, we are punishing people's families for the crimes that they commit. And that, I think, is something that we might want to reconsider as a, as a one size fits all approach to dealing with crime. I'm not going to say that nobody should ever be incarcerated, because there's, there are absolutely circumstances where that is the wisest, uh, course of action. But I would say that the sentences that we often give people are, uh, we're at a point of diminishing returns when you send someone away for 40 years. Uh,
Yeah.
you know,
And here's where it gets me about incarceration. It's like people that are on like drugs, like whatever it may be, and it's like they get like life imprisonment just for doing crack cocaine. Sure, it's bad, but why make it illegal if because it's they're hurting themselves and not anyone else. Does that make sense? Like, you understand what I'm saying? Like, why did he get 60 years in prison for lighting up a crack pipe when that guy over there just shot a man in the head in front of a cop and then didn't do anything? It's this weird system that we have that I think needs to be solved in some weird way. And I know everybody is probably listening to me and you're like, this guy is nuts. He said crackheads shouldn't be in prison, but it's not that. It's not they shouldn't be in prison. It's the justice system itself of how they look at them.
well, it's also, what are we trying to do here? Which is what kind of brings me back to this question of what is justice?
Mhm.
And 97% of the people who go to prison come out.
Mhm.
And so what's going to happen when they come out? Are they going to be able to get a job?
Right.
Do they have the tools that they need to not light up that crack pipe or not commit another robbery or not get into a violent altercation because they don't know how to manage their emotions? All of those things. So we take people away and we hold them, but then most of the time we don't give them any of the resources that they need to
Mhm.
not do those things again. And so as we think about crime prevention, which I think is the goal, like what we're trying to do is not have crime, not have people be hurt, not have people be robbed, those kinds of things.
Mhm.
I think we have to look more creatively at what do you do to create a system where maybe people before they commit a crime get the help they need so that they're not addicted to drugs, or they're not incapable of managing their emotions and in a way that results in somebody getting hurt, those kinds of things.
Well, you can get Dashka's new books, The Book of Fatal Errors and A Book of Escargot, wherever you get your books. I know I'm going to purchase them for my cousin and my nephew so they can enjoy them as well. Dashka, I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to come to little old me and do my show, but I really did enjoy it.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I love the questions that you asked. So it was a good time was had by all.